I wanted to do just a quick tutorial on this page in your packet on related angles. Like I mentioned in class today, this is really the same content as what's covered in section 4-4, but I felt like this was a much more straightforward kind of all in one place type review. So I just gave you a number here for cosine. I gave this to you in class today in case you missed it. I could have given you anything. I could have given you any cosine I wanted. I also could have given you a sine value and asked you a lot of the same questions. But we'll work with this. And then the first thing I would do before you start answering any questions is draw yourself a picture, because we're going to need that for lots of these things. Okay, so draw yourself a circle. And then just as a reminder to myself, I'm going to mark down here that this x-axis is really my cosine, and the y-axis is really my sine values. And then tangent is like the ratio between the two. Okay, I also should probably mark that this is 0, this is pi, and this is 2 pi. That's going to be helpful to me later on. Okay, I need some more colors in here. So if I have that cosine theta is 0.74, that means along my x-axis here, I'm going out to where it's about 0.74, and that's where my theta is going to fall. Now, it could be up here, right? Or it could also be down here. Both of these are going to have the same cosine value, up and down. I'm going to stick with this one in the first quadrant because that kind of makes everything else work out nicely. So I'm going to call this angle right here theta. And I know that at this angle, my cosine value is 0.74. I don't know what my sine value is yet. I have a feeling I'm going to be finding it in just a minute. But for right now, that's what I know about this point right here, is that the x-coordinate is 0.74. I don't know what the sine value is. So when I look at this first question and it says pi minus theta, I need to think about what that's really saying. Theta is how far did I turn from 0 up to where theta is, right? So pi minus theta would be me starting at pi and going backwards that same amount, okay? Going backwards by theta. And so what that's really going to do is give me this angle that's directly across from the angle I had before. That's pi minus theta right there. Okay? So the question is, if my cosine over here is 0.74, what's my cosine here? And because you're working along your x-axis here, these are positive, these are negative, so this guy is going to have a cosine of negative 0.74. Okay. Now, if we were talking about sine values, these two would have the same sine value. So if I'd given you a sine value, you would tell me this one is exactly the same. Okay, but I didn't. I asked about cosine. I'm going to try to zoom this in a little better. No, that's not it. Sorry. I can do better here. There we go. Okay, so now where would negative theta fall? Well, when I move from 0 in this direction, that's positive theta. Negative theta would be going the same distance in the negative direction. Okay, so if I go theta downward, I guess, for lack of a better word, this angle right here would be considered negative theta. And that's going to be straight down from here. And we mentioned this at the beginning, that this angle here, whatever this one is, would have the same cosine as this one, because this x value right here would stay exactly the same. Okay? So at negative theta, my cosine is still 0.74. Okay. So now when I look at this next one, sorry, I'm mixing up my colors, pi plus theta, that's me starting at pi and moving theta from there. Okay, that's going to give me this angle that's directly across, like diagonally. That is pi plus theta. So now my question is, what would the cosine be there? Well, if it was 0.74 here, negative 0.74 here, positive 0.74 here, what's it going to be here? Well, once again, if we're looking on the x-axis, this is moving in the negative direction. So really the cosine would be the same here and here. That's negative 0.74. Okay. So before I go any farther, let me just jot down what we just found here. At pi minus theta, we would be at negative 0.74, and then we have some sine value. At pi plus theta, we'd be at negative 0.74, and we'd have some sine value. And at negative theta, we'd be at positive 0.74, and we'd have some sine value. Okay? So negative, negative, because this half of the graph is negative. Positive, positive, because this half of the graph is positive. All right, so let's look at this one here. This pi over 2 minus theta. This was that theorem we learned where we said that if two angles are complementary, the sine of one will match the cosine of the other. Okay? So when you see this thing, sine of pi over 2 minus theta, I want you to cross it out in your mind and say that's really the same thing as just cosine theta. So I switched from sine to cosine, and then we're just talking about theta. Well, look at this up here. We know cosine theta, right? So this is really just saying, what's the cosine of theta? It's 0.74. We already knew that. Okay? All right, what about 2 pi plus theta? Well, if this is theta, and I add 2 pi, that's going to take me all the way around and just land back on the same spot. That this 2 pi plus theta is really just equal to theta. All right, adding 2 pi just keeps things the same. So my cosine of theta is once again, same thing as we had up here. All right, it's going to be 0.74. Okay, now we're getting into some real math here. Secant of theta. Secant of theta is equal to 1 over the cosine of theta, which in our case would be 1 over 0.74, because we know what the cosine is. But we're mathematicians, and we know better than to leave things like this. So in my calculator, I'm actually going to do, 1 divided by 0.74. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. And I get this 1.35. That's my value of secant. Okay? All right. This one here is where we actually have to do some calculations. I guess in secant we had to do some calculations too. But if I'm given cosine theta and I'm trying to find sine theta, this is where I'm going to have to use the Pythagorean identity. All right, Pythagorean identity is what I'm pulling out here. So I'm going to go sine squared of theta plus cosine squared of theta equals 1. Sine is what I'm looking for, so that's going to stay a sine squared. This is going to become 0.74 squared equals 1. That will simplify down to sine squared of theta plus, let's see, 0.74 squared comes out to be 0.5476 equals 1. Guess I should show you what I'm doing here. Okay, so I did 0.74 squared. Next up, I want to subtract that from 1. So I'm going to do 1 minus that 0.5476, and I end up with sine squared of theta equals 0.4524. And at this stage of the game, this is where I need to take a square root. Okay. Don't forget that because we took a square root to get this, though, that this should really be plus or minus we'll just go 673. Okay, that plus or minus is important. You will lose points on your quiz if you don't have it as plus or minus. The reason for that is if we look back at our lovely picture that we drew up here. Remember we originally said theta could be here or here because both of these have this same cosine value. We drew it up here just to make all of this other stuff look pretty around the circle, but it could have been either place. Okay. If it were up here, though, it would be a positive 0.67. That's what we just figured out, is that this would be 0.67. If it was down here, this would be a negative 0.67. So because we don't know which one of these angles we're dealing with, it could be either one, and so we do have to make sure we list both. Which means when I go to find tangent, there's two different possibilities because it could be this one or this one. Okay? So tangent is, let's see, tangent is sine over cosine. The sine I just figured out is plus or minus 0.673. The cosine I know from up above is 0.74. So really what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to divide those two decimals. So I'll just leave it in here from before, and I'm going to divide by 0.74. And I get I'm going to go 909, okay? But because of this plus or minus right here, my answer is also going to be a plus or minus 0.909. And again, the reason I'm getting that plus or minus is I could be looking at this angle or this angle based on the given information at the top. Okay? And last one, cosecant. Well, cosecant is really 1 over sine. And we have the sine up here. So I'm going to go 1 over plus or minus 0.673. Once again, I don't want to leave it like that because I'm a good mathematician. So I'm going to do 1 divided by 0.673. I get this 1.49-ish number. Oh, and then I forgot that because this was a plus or minus, really I should have a plus or minus in my answer. Okay. So that's kind of everything that you can get from this one tiny little piece of information. If I give you the cosine, you should be able to find all of these other things about this angle. Okay? You could practice this yourself. Make up a different value of cosine and ask yourself these same questions, or make up a value of sine and ask yourself to find the sine of all of these things, because it does change a little bit when you're talking about sines. Remember that the sines stay the same going left to right. So like these two angles here would have the same sine value. This would be positive 0.67. This one would be negative 0.67. But then they change going up and down. So that is going to change kind of some of your answers for these first few. You will still get pluses or minuses anytime you do anything involving like that Pythagorean identity, because you're looking at two different possible angles. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful to you. I will post just a hard copy of this too if that's helpful. And then we will look at this and maybe some proofs tomorrow in class.